If you own a home services business, I think there's a pretty good chance you're consuming too much business content. Not too little, too much. Because think about what happens. You watch one guy who tells you that you need to spend more money on advertising, and somebody who tells you paid ads are a waste of money and you should focus on SEO. And then there's somebody that tells you that your problem isn't marketing at all, it's sales. Somebody tells you to stop selling and start hiring, and somebody tells you you need an integrator, then you hear that AI is going to change everything, and before you know it, you got 14 different people telling you 14 different ways to run your company. And they're not necessarily wrong, and that's the problem. A lot of them are giving pretty good advice, but the good advice applied to the wrong problem is still bad advice. And so that's what I want to talk about in this video, not just here are some people that you should follow. I want to give you a better way to decide who you should listen to based on what your business actually needs right now, because I don't think you should have just one business guru that you listen to for everything. You should build what I call a learning bench. You should have somebody you learn from for about marketing and sales, somebody you learn from about conversion, somebody you learn from about operations and building systems, and somebody who helps you think about the bigger picture. Maybe that's how do I actually build a company with value? How do I build something that doesn't completely depend on me? Because the best business content isn't necessarily the video with the best thumbnail. It's not necessarily the person with the biggest audience or whoever you just decide to scroll up on or who's ever at the top of your feed that day. The best content is content that helps you solve the most expensive problem in your business right now. And that's the entire premise of this video. So before we talk about a single person to follow, let's figure out what that problem actually is. So what's actually holding your business back? So I want you to think about 4 statements and don't overthink this. Which one sounds the most like your company right now? Number 1, we don't have enough qualified opportunities. The crews can handle more work, you want to grow, but there simply isn't enough good calls coming in. That's a demand problem. Number 2, we're getting leads, we're just not converting enough of them. So maybe your close rate sucks, maybe estimates aren't getting followed up with, maybe you're getting price shopped constantly, or maybe your average ticket isn't where it needs to be. That's a conversion problem. Number 3, maybe the owner is still in the system. So every decision comes back to you. Every employee has a question for you. Something happens on the job, they call you. Customer has a problem, they call you. Salesperson needs an answer, they call you. You're getting what I'm putting down. You take 2 days off and somehow the whole company forgets to operate. That's an execution problem. And number 4, the business is growing, but I'm not sure I'm actually building an asset. Revenue might be going up. Maybe you have a good team, but if you disappeared tomorrow, what would actually be left? And that's an ownership problem. Those are 4 very different problems. They require very different information, so choose the one that feels like the most like your company and where it's at now, because that's where I would start. So let's start with demand. So if your biggest problem is we need more qualified people finding us and contacting us, there are 2 people that I would pay attention to specifically. So the first is a guy named Noah Igler, huge on YouTube. He talks about local service business SEO. So here's who I think Noah makes the most sense for. Let's say you own a roofing company, you're doing 2 or 3 or 4 or $5 million a year. You got crews, you do good work, you've got happy customers. But when somebody in your market pulls out their phone and searches roof replacement near me or the best roofer in whatever city you're in, you barely exist. Your Google Business Profiles week, they got 37. You got 37 reviews. Maybe your competitor has 400. Your website has a homepage, an about page, one generic services page. You're not showing up in maps. You're not getting much organic traffic. That's the kind of situation where I'd start consuming Noah's content. His material gets into local SEO, Google Maps, GBPs, reviews, services pages, websites, Google Ads, local service ads, and ultimately how you turn all that search demand into actual booked work. The reason I like starting that as a point is because it's specific. You're not trying to solve your entire business. You're asking people are already looking for what we sell. How do we get in front of them more? So that's a very solvable question. Start there and go from there. The next person that I would put in this category is a guy named Steven Hunsaker. And I think Steve is a little bit different. I think of Noah as being more focused on capturing local search demand. Steve's going to give you a much wider view of the whole marketing system. So that's paid marketing, organic marketing, physical marketing. So that'd be like mailers and stuff. Lead gen, business systems, building a team around it. So let's say you got Google somewhat figured out, you're ranking, you're running ads, you got reviews, but you look at your overall marketing and feel like this still feels random. Maybe you're completely dependent on one lead source, or maybe referrals are great one month and non-existent the next month, or maybe you're just spending money, but you don't really have a system behind it. That's where I'd start digging into like Steve's material. So here's the easiest way to think about these 2. If local search is a constraint, then I'd start with Noah. And if you need broader marketing engine, then I'd start with Steve, and eventually learn from the both of them. Some honorable mentions. Obviously, I like to talk about myself, but I'm not going to do that. Striker Digital, so that's Andy and Bodie. They both post a lot of great free content on Twitter. Really, really good stuff, and they're doing more on YouTube now. Marcus Sheridan's another great one. I always talk about Marcus Sheridan, so if you've probably watched any of my other videos, he's my number one like marketing guy out there. He has a system called They Ask You Answer. It's all about answering your customers with common questions. Just follow that. So those are the guys I would follow. So the next question is, but what if I already have leads? So this is where a lot of home service companies screw up. The phone is ringing, the forms are coming in, appointments are being booked, and the owner says, we need more leads. Do you actually? Or are you just doing a bad job with the ones you're already paying for? Because these are very different things. If you're getting hundreds of leads a month and your sales process is a disaster, getting you 150 leads a month will just give you 50 more opportunities to waste. So before you increase the ad budget, you need to understand conversion. So there's a few people I would look at for this too. Steve's probably another one actually, now I think about it, but first one is Tom Reber. This is Tom Reber from the Contractor Fight, and I think Tom is especially useful for contractors who struggle with the money side of selling. So pricing, profit, having uncomfortable conversations, standing behind what you actually charge, not immediately discounting because the homeowner just gave you a weird look when you told them the number. There are lots of contractors who are really, really good at their trade and absolutely hate selling. They'll confidently tell you how a wall should be built, and then they'll confidently tell you about how a roof should be installed, but the second the homeowner says, wow, that's more than I expected, they fold like a folding table. And if that's you, Tom's contractor-specific sales and profit material is probably worth paying attention to. Same thing, he has a lot of great free content. His delivery is very, very, very direct, but you're not going to him to become best friends with him or copy his personality. The other thing I want to make clear in this video is you don't have to agree 100% with any person on this list or what they say. Just take the useful frameworks, test them in your company, and keep going with what works. Another one just real quick is Ryan Groth and the Sales Transformation Group. Ryan is one I'd especially pay attention to if you're running something like a roofing business where you start building, you're starting to build a true sales organization. And I'll get into Lance Bachmann and Tommy Mello here in a minute, but at first the owner sells everything, and usually the owner's pretty good at it. They know the company, they know the product, they care more about the product than anybody else. They're going to hire one salesperson. Maybe they hire salesperson number one. Maybe that person crushes it, so they hire three more. And suddenly you realize, oh, we don't actually have a sales system. We had one really good salesperson. That's a completely different problem. And now you're talking about training, recruiting, sales leadership, accountability, consistency. So that's where I start looking at Ryan stuff. So if there's one thing I want you to remember from this entire sales section, it's this. Don't buy more leads until you understand what is happening with the leads you already have. And that one sentence could save companies a ridiculous amount of money. So next up is, what if my business is actually growing? So this is a little bit of a different stage. Let's say your business is growing, you're not starving for opportunities, you're selling work consistently, maybe you're doing $3, $4, $5 million a year. From the outside, things are looking really, really good. But from the inside, your life is chaos. Your phone never stops ringing, your team constantly needs you, you're making good money, but you can't really leave. You take a vacation and spend half the vacation on your email, Slack, or on your phone. That's not a lead problem, that's not a sales problem, or necessarily not a sales problem. We're getting into owner dependence. And the first person I'd look at here is a guy named Mike Andes. So what I like about Mike's content is a lot of it comes back to making the business actually make sense. So pricing, capacity, profitability, systems, leadership, numbers, and reducing the company's dependence on the owner, because being busy and having good business are not the same thing. You can have trucks everywhere, employees everywhere, jobs everywhere, revenue going up, and still own a terrible business. If you're the person holding the entire thing together, you don't really have leverage. You have a very complicated and a pain in the ass job. So if your companies feel successful from the outside, but internally everything still flows through you, I'd start looking at Mike's material around owner dependence, systems, pricing, capacity, profitability. Next up is the GOAT, Tommy Mello. The reason I'd have Tommy on the bench is because of the breadth of what the home service expert library is. Once you reach a certain size, you stop having one problem. You've got recruiting problems, leadership problems, sales problems, tech problems, call center problems, compensation problems, Recurring revenue problems, management problems, everything starts becoming a problem and everything starts becoming more complex. With Tommy, there's a huge library of conversations with operators who have dealt with those different issues. So I wouldn't necessarily sit down and say, I'm going to consume every Tommy Mello podcast on the planet. That's not the point. I treat it like a search engine. So if recruiting is the current issue, I'd study these podcasts about recruiting. If sales leadership is the issue, study sales leadership. If the call center performance is the issue or your CSRs suck, study that stuff. Always start with the problem and then find the content, not the other way around. And the harsh reality behind this whole section is a business that relies directly on the owner for every important decision is very difficult to scale. It's also very difficult to sell. So the next person I want to talk about is an interesting one because as companies get more complex, I think this person's a really good resource for that. It's John Wilson from Owned and Operated, huge on Twitter too. One of the main things I've noticed about home services is people love talking about marketing. Marketing is sexy. Everybody wants to talk about Facebook ads or Google ads or LSAs or SEO or leads or whatever the newest thing is at the time. But sometimes the marketing is actually working fine. The business is just leaking everywhere else. So you're missing calls. Your CSRs aren't booking appointments. Dispatch is super inefficient. Nobody knows the booking rate. Nobody knows the close rate. Nobody knows the gross margin by department. Nobody really understands your P&L, so follow-up is inconsistent, and the owner's response is always, we need more leads. No, you need to answer your damn phone. You might need to know your numbers. You might need to fix dispatch. You might need to understand why 30% of your inbound calls aren't turning into appointments. And that's why I look at John's content. So especially if you're in HVAC or plumbing, or even electrical, restoration, roofing, any of those. One of the ones with like a operationally complex like service business. So he gets into things like call centers, P&Ls, operating metrics, bookings, acquisitions, multi-location operations, all that fun stuff. I love his Twitter, and I've looked at his website like 90 million times. So I love it all. He gets really good into the nuts and bolts of it all. And that stuff is incredibly important because as the company gets larger, tiny operational leaks become very expensive. So if you're getting 10 calls a month and missing 2 isn't good. If you're getting 1,000 calls a month, a bad booking rate can cost you a fortune. So scale magnifies inefficiency. Side note, I haven't mentioned him yet, but another really good operator is a guy named Chad Peterman. He owns Peterman Brothers. He's growing on social media more and more. I love looking at that dude's Facebook comments because it's a bunch of guys doing like $200K a year being like, my CSRs are better than your CSRs. Since he's running like $500 million enterprise, but he's getting really good content. I would start consuming his content too around this stuff. But now let's talk about what you're actually building. So this brings me into my last category, which is ownership. So not how do I get leads next Tuesday or how do I sell this estimate or not even how do I hire this next employee. But what am I actually building here? And that's where I'd put Lance Bachmann, because eventually I think every owner should start viewing their company through the eyes of somebody who might buy it. Even if you have absolutely no intention of ever selling, I want you to think about it this way. If somebody was going to write you a giant check for your company tomorrow, what would they actually care about? They're going to want clean financials. They're going to want leadership. They're going to want systems. They're going to want to understand the customer concentration, lead source concentration, profitability of the team, and how dependent the business is actually on you. They're probably not going to care that you worked 90 hours a week and personally saved every difficult job. In fact, that's probably going to make the company less attractive to a buyer. That's why I think Lance's content around growth, leadership, systems, valuations, clean financials, PE, and building something buyers would actually value is very useful. And again, you don't need to be selling next year. You might never sell, but I think there's tremendous value in asking, would somebody who wants to own this business, would somebody want to own this business if I wasn't involved? And that's a very different question from how much revenue did we do this month? And usually building a company that somebody else would want to own also creates a company that's better for you to own. And the other thing I like about Lance is he's very direct to the point, even if you don't want to hear it. He's not going to like bullshit you and tell you what he thinks you want to hear. He's very much like, you need to do this, this, and this. And sometimes you might not want to hear that. And sometimes you'll just take it and execute. So who do I actually follow? So let's simplify all of this, because the last thing I want you to do is give you a video about consuming less random content and then need to tell you to go follow 11 more people. So that would completely defeat the point of it. So here's what I would do. If your biggest problem is local demand, like SEO, if that's where you're really, really struggling, I would just start with Noah Igler, start there, and then go into Stephen Hunsaker when you think about the broader marketing system. If your problem is marketing strategy overall, then I'd start with Steve and then add Noah. If your problem is sales, pricing, or conversion, start with Tom Reber, depending on your business. If your problem is owner dependence, start with Mike Andes and then add Tommy Mello as the company gets more complex. If your problem is operational discipline, look at John Wilson. And if you're trying to think about growing long term or the long term value of your business, start to watch Lance's content. Those are the people I'd have sitting on my bench of like rotational content to watch, not because they're right about everything, nobody is, but because they each give you a different lens into a different type of problem. And where business content gets dangerous, and I think this part is really important, is business content can absolutely make your company worse because context disappears online. You'll watch a clip of somebody running a $100 million company and they'll say, you need to hire a CFO. And somebody running an 800,000 roofing company thinks, holy shit, I need to hire a CFO. Probably don't at this point in time. Or maybe somebody operating in Phoenix tells you exactly how they're generating leads, but you're a remodeling company in rural Pennsylvania. Different businesses, different markets, different customer, different economics, and a different problem. Or somebody tells you never do this and they sound extremely confident, so you immediately change something that's been working perfectly fine in your company for 5 years. That's the danger. Confidence is not context, and something working for somebody else does not mean you should blindly copy it. And that's why I think there's a really simple way to consume business content. 3 steps: watch it, test it, measure it. So first, you want to watch it, but watch with a specific question. So don't open YouTube and say, I'm going to learn about business today. That's way too broad. Ask, how can we increase our call booking rate? Or how do we rank our roofing company in maps? Or how do we get my project manager to make decisions without calling me? Or how do we structure our sales meetings? Now you know what you're looking for. Then test it. Take one idea, adapt it to your company, your market, your trade, your employees, your customers, and try it. Then measure it. So what happened? Did our booking rate go up? Did our close rate improve? Did your average ticket increase? Did margins get better? Did you remove yourself from a process? Did you actually get more qualified calls? Because this is another rule to keep in mind. Good content gives you a hypothesis, not a command. So somebody on a podcast says something interesting. Great, that's a hypothesis. Now go test whether it actually works in your company. Don't tear apart the business Tuesday morning because a 45-second Instagram reel sounded convincing Monday night at 1 a.m. So what I would do for the next 30 days is pick one problem, whether it's demand, conversion, execution, ownership. Pick which ones is costing you the most right now, and then pick 2 people who are the strongest in that area. Not 9, 2. And give yourself 1 hour a week to deliberately learn about that specific problem. And for every week, implement one thing, not 7. And I'd even push that maybe every month implement one thing. Because implementing one idea and measuring it will teach you a hell of a lot more than watching a podcast or another 40 hours more of podcasts. So, and here's how you'll know whether you're doing this correctly or not. At the end of the month, you should be able to answer 5 questions. What was the most expensive bottleneck in my business? Who did I choose to learn from? What did I study? And what did I implement? And most importantly, what changed? Because if nothing changed, then what exactly was the point of consuming all that content? And actually, if you finish the video and immediately go follow every single person I mentioned, I probably did a really poor job of explaining this. The entire point is the opposite. Stop letting your feed determine what you work on. Figure out where your company is bleeding the most money. Find the people who can help you think through that problem. Ignore most of the other noise for a while. Implement something, measure it, then move on to the next constraint. So pick one problem, follow 2 people, implement one idea. That's it. Thank you guys.